the biggest hurdle that I personally see on the line a lot of times is uh, those shooters or that shooter that's just beating themselves up. They're tearing
Hmm.
themselves down inside their own head.
Hmm.
Like, how do you address stuff like that?
Really quickly and swiftly from the very beginning. So, normally, anyone I'm working with, whether it be a private environment, a larger class, a class I'm AIing, anything like that, I try and make a point very early on in conversation to have a failure conversation, and have a conversation about failure in relation to learning. And because really, a lot of times, people are just looking for someone to give them permission to, excuse my French, suck at something, especially in relation to shooting. Nobody wants to be the worst shooter in a shooting class. I don't care if you picked up a gun yesterday for the first time. You don't want to be the worst one in the class. That's where you get a lot of the sayings like, well, I've been shooting a gun forever. Or I shot a gun with a kid. I've been shooting a gun my whole life. That's not normally a quantifier for someone to say, hey, I'm good and I don't have to listen. That's a defensive mechanism for someone to say, hey, I don't want anyone to know that I'm really bad at this. And if you address that directly and not say, hey, you're really bad at this, but say, you know what, we're learning skills that someone from the very beginning shooter to the very advanced shooter could garner something from, and it's okay to struggle. It's okay. There's no judgment here. If you can pull that out, because normally that dynamic is not coming from the instructor to the student or the instructor to the client. It's the clients creating their own hierarchical system or believing that that system is there. And more often than not, it's not there. People just believe it is. So that's really the first thing I do is try and make people understand it's okay to fail. It's okay to make mistakes. I do it. I mean, I will tank a demo with the best of them. I'll tank a shooting challenge with the best of them, but I can also succeed with the best of them. What the difference is, if you can get there relatively quickly, is have people understand who they are and where they are as a shooter. Once they understand that and there's not a negative or a positive quotient to it, then it's just expectation to perform to who you are. And that's releasing for a lot of people. So once they understand, if you're, let's frame it in like a bill drill, right? If you just had a relatively new shooters and you're saying, hey, 6 shots from the holster, it's probably going to take anywhere from 2 to 7 seconds, depending on your skill level. And acceptable accuracy would be this to this. Once you say that and you give kind of a window, it kind of takes fear out for people, and then you can kind of get a baseline. Then once you have a baseline, then through observation on what you've seen, you can help pull them along to get them where you think they should be versus them dictating that for you. Does that make sense?
That makes a world of sense. Yeah. So we talked a lot about fear. I feel like sometimes fear is a lot of the reason why folks aren't coming to classes, but that's not the only reason. There might be some other stuff going on there. For like, what kind of barriers do you see, and how can we overcome those?
Oh, there's a ton. So the fear quotient, obviously. Um, I think what's pervasive in our industry is there's not a lot of outreach for people to understand that it is not a difficult situation to enter into. It's not overly taxing to get education. And I think, and oddly enough, so when we think about firearms training in general, no one would think out of the blue to go buy a parachute and go jump out of a plane and just say, I watched it on YouTube, how to pack a chute, and I'm going to jump out of this plane and it's going to work out great. I mean, if that happened very often, we'd probably know about it. There'd be news stories, right? But in firearms, and I think it's endemic in just our society with the Second Amendment, things like that. They've been around. They've always been around. right? Firearms in general, defense, the concept of defense, things like that. So a very little bit of exposure to a lot of people equates to what they believe is knowledge. And they think they don't need it. And, it's rare that you find people, and I hate to use this term, but like a training junkie or someone that really wants to dig into the nuance of not only the concepts of things, but the different ways to explain that. It's rare, and people have to be driven for that. But I think we're actually in the renaissance of firearms training. I mean, there's a vast catalog of quality people out there doing quality work, and a lot of people are struggling, to get work, though there's millions of new gun owners. Um, you know, I think it's like anything else that we run into in the modern age, where you have any piece of information at your fingertips, that if anyone searches that, they integrate that into their thinking, that they understand what that means. Now, you can have an answer. That doesn't mean you understand it. So that's one big thing. That's a tough one to overcome. I think doing what you're doing with this, or the judicious use of social media to actually get people to understand, to be inclusive about it and not alienating about it. And that's something I've also seen that's systemic. It's Facebook's notorious for this. Like, Facebook gun groups are just dog piles on people if they don't understand. And I've kind of chosen to kind of move away from a whole bunch of that, because it's not helpful. And normally the people that are the most vicious or harsh about it are the people with the least amount to offer from helping people. But on the other side of that spectrum, there's, the ASPs of the world that are doing incredible work. The Filster group doing incredible work. So there's a ton of people out there, but it's like anything else, it's hard. And then, obviously monetary stuff, good training is not cheap. I mean, um, that's the tough part too. Like, when you get into talking about what it takes to be a solid coach, or a high quality coach, and it does not end with, an NRA instructor and certification. Not saying there's anything bad about that, but that's where it begins, not where it ends. So for someone to get actually good at this, it's a long-term investment in your skill development, a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of sleepless nights. And it's really a labor of love for most people that do it, that I know that are good at it. It's not monetary by any means, but when you look at the investment over time, you cannot give it all away. You just can't. You have to get some kind of return on that investment, unless you're just like a nun about it, which is awesome. But it's not cheap, and that's a big one for people. And I certainly understand that. Like, going to a 2-day class, if there's travel involved, it's tough. And you couple that, and I know I'm like going off on a tangent, but it's what I do. I can't help myself.
I love tangents. Yeah.
But a lot of times people are unaware of the difference between what quality and non-quality training is. So if your only experience with training was your state mandated concealed carry course or something like that, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. I'm not saying the people that do that aren't passionate, but that's not coaching. It's not learning to perform better. That's literally learning information to meet a minimum. I'd be hesitant to even say competency level, because that's not really what it's about. It's just this is the information you have to have, that the Crown says you need to know before you can do that. And that's very, very different than going to a tailor-made defensive course to understand defensive concepts and performance related thereto. So I think that was like 3 or 4 reasons.
Man, that's great stuff, though. Yeah, I love to listen to it. Yeah, those are really good tips. Folks, I want to give a very special thank you to the Top Gun Shooting Range in Memphis, Tennessee. This is where I teach personally. We hold permit classes, introductory courses, and advanced handgun self defense courses. You can also rent guns to shoot on the range, including fully automatic machine guns. Also, in pure Memphis fashion, there's a barbecue restaurant in the building. Top Gun Memphis has 4.9 stars on Google reviews, so if you're in the area, come by and see us. Go to topgunmemphis.com for more info.